Warp Spinster here. Thank you for joining me today. And I don't say that lightly. I really am glad to have you here. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your comments and your suggestions and the laughs you give me sometimes too. Today, I want to do a little more along the lines of what we did last week, which was whatever you would want to call this. It was based on the game Stadium Checkers, and then sort of looked like a bridge to me, looked like a pagoda Zen kind of thing for someone. So I like the idea and want to continue it, but I'm going to do it a little differently this time. I have some bright solids here and also some mostly white on black, but one black on white print. I have a lot more floating around somewhere, but I think this will be enough to get me started today. And then I'm going to start off, I think, with some white squares. This was intended to be a quarter of a circle. So it would continue down here. I would finish doing something down here as well. Possibly in the, well, maybe a little gray strip and then another print down here. So I thought that I might, in fact, this time start with a square and then build the circles out from here, or the rings out from here. And that would give me a better start on having this corner down here to work with. And there are a couple of things I thought about trying. I don't know, we'll certainly do one of them today. I don't know about both of them. But I thought about doing, first of all, different sizes so that I would have a quarter of a circle for all of them, but a different size circle, so that one of them might only come out to here and then another one much larger. And the smaller one I would have to fill within with the background to make it the same size, to piece it together with the other one. Anyway, various sizes for the quarters of the circle. I could also do just 3/4 of a circle and, you know, plug a black and white stripe into 1/4. Had to bring that in somewhere. Otherwise you wouldn't really know it was me. If I'm ever kidnapped, then there's your proof of life. What's the one fabric she would use in any quilt? So I'm going to get started with that. And I think this time, as I mentioned last week, I believe, this could use some pressing, is to do the rings in the black and white, and in between, or the white on black, and then in between do the black on white for kind of a rest for the eye. And then these little slots would be in the solid colors. And I've given some thought to if I might want these just to be straight instead of this wedge shape. But I think to be true to this curve kind of thing, I think I do still want to go with a wedge. We'll see what happens. And Emily is here too. Yes. Good morning, Emily. So let's get started. And I think I'll start at the bottom because it's going to be a reasonably short ring. I think I'll start with this small white on black, which maybe, hope that's not blowing out the camera here. So I will cut this at the same time. Pardon me, I know this needs pressing, but right now I'm going to just cut a curve that will be the bottom of this ring piece. And always remembering that this is the piece that I'm going to save. I don't know why that's difficult for me. You'd think it would be pretty obvious, but it's that whole can't do spatial relationships thing with me. And I really don't know how wide I want these rings to be. They may, of course, be varying widths, or they might be about the same, and they could be wide or they could be narrow. So I'm just going to start with doing a pretty gentle curve here. And I want this piece to be wide enough to start filling out the rings or the circle as we go out. So this piece will go into the crumb box. And I want this curve to go a little further. Oh, I know what I'm going to do is go get a Kevlar glove, because as someone rightly pointed out, she was getting a little nervous watching the cutter go so close to my fingers, and the camera angle makes it look closer than it was, but I should be modeling good safe behavior. So I am going to go get a Kevlar glove, or a klutz glove as it's called, and then I will be back. And here's the glove that I use. It honestly probably isn't Kevlar. I don't think it is, but I call it that just so it's seen as some protection when you're cutting. This is the Fons and Porter glove, which is called the klutz glove. There are probably some other protective gloves out there. This just happens to be what my quilt shop had. I have no affiliation with them. If you've got another protective glove, by all means use that. This particular one can be used either on the left or the right hand, and it's not going to protect you against really serious hacking with a sharp object, but it will give you some protection as you're going around. If you happen to nudge the tip, then you're safer than if you had bare fingers there. All right. Safety notice for the day: be careful in any case. It is not a license to just start hacking at things. Still be careful. So I'm going to stitch this curve on. Last week's video on, what did I call it? I think fabric stadium checkers or something. I'll try to remember to link that below as to how I do these curves. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that, and then we'll come back and start on the interim ring, which was this gray ring before. In fact, maybe I will just go, no, I'll come back and do that, and then I won't plan to show you every single cut and curve I make, because it's pretty much just a repeat of last week. The miracle of video in Karen's hands. I recorded things I did not want to, and did not record things that I wanted to. Once again, I forgot that I needed to insert the wedge before I sewed that strip on. So I did cut some pink into a wedge and cut the same angles on the black strip for the ring, and made ready to sew that on before I attach that to the white centerpiece. Then I trimmed the curve to the curve that's on the white piece and sewed that curve together. Now you'll notice that I have left part of that black arc to both the left and the right, and that's so when I trim this up and continue that angle from that white section, that I'm not going to run off the edge of the black, that I'll have room for the curve. Then I used the black on white print to create another curve, the second curve, and again I left space on either side to allow for trimming at that same angle, following the angle from the white piece. And now back to our regularly scheduled recording. This was a long, very gentle curve, so I didn't have to stop to adjust the fabric. Just stopped long enough to grab my tweezers to pull the end over. Now, I will note that I am choosing to press these toward, in this case, the lighter fabric, because while I might have pressed it the opposite direction, I'm having to fold back seams there if I do that, and that is not my preference in this case. So they are pressed toward the light, and in order to mitigate the possibility of that shadowing through on the edges, I have gone in, pulled back the white side of the seam allowance, and then trimmed off just a sliver, not enough to mess with the integrity of the seam, but just a sliver, and I've done that on both of those seams. Now, up next, we will be doing another large print ring. And I think I will do this one. And as I'm doing this, I'm really beginning to believe that I'm going to be cutting this down some, to be honest. But I want that ring to be pretty narrow. It's just a divider for the eye to have a little bit of a place to rest as it's going through all of these funky bright fabrics. So I'm going to want this, oops, need some more on this side too. And partly because we're ending up with pretty, I'm going to start cutting this, trimming this so I can see where I'm going to be ending up. And in fact, I'm going to trim a little bit of that original white square off, the white corner. And I think I'll be cutting some of this off too, which, as you can see, maybe I won't, because if I cut this curve first, then I can preserve a little greater length on this than if I trim this off, then I've got a piece that's a little shorter there. It makes sense to my brain, so whether or not I'm making it clear, it's sense to my brain. So I'm going to wait to cut that edge off. And I'm close over here. This is the selvage. It would be fine with the selvage because of the print, but this is going to be a pretty narrow seam there anyway. But I want to do this piece first because I'm going to sew the wedge in there before I cut the curve. So that's going to be plenty wide as a wedge. This is going to get trimmed down a bit. So I think actually about here is going to be fine. You know I will use that piece. So now I want this to be cut so that I have enough to do a seam allowance up here. So I wanted want to cut it a 1/4 inch wider than I want it to look. So let me just kind of, because my spatial relationship is so bad, I'm going to mark just like a 1/2 inch up here. So that would give me, say, a 1/4 inch piece in between, which I think is about as much as I want on this one. We're going to give it a go. We shall see how it ends up. Put my glove back on. Safety first. And then, I don't even know where my mark is, but gave me enough visual that I can kind of see where I'm going. Now this curve does not have to match that one. It just has to match that one. So if this is not a perfect curve in relation to this one, it's okay, and in fact might be kind of more fun. So that piece goes away for later to play another day, and then this one is going to match up to that somewhere. I will get it matched up. All right, so that's how it matches up. But I want to put a wedge in there, which I was going to do before I got that curve. Old habits die hard, I guess. So what do I want next? Blue, green, orange. I don't think I want orange yet. Well, maybe I do. I'm sort of on this orange and pink kick, which if you told my 5-year-ago self that, I would have said you were crazy. So, oops, sorry. It's between these two. I think I'm going to go with the green chartreuse whatever you want to call that. And I want to be sure to put it in a place where it will be offset from there. And I think maybe about there. Oh, maybe I've got a little scrap on the edge here that I could use. Could be a narrow wedge, doesn't have to be the same width as the other. So I could cut one that fits that. Pull that out. And this time I think I might cut an identical wedge. So pull that piece out and we'll, it didn't really matter on the other one though, did it? It was just cut the same angle and we were fine. To trim up the curve, but probably gonna have to do that anyway. So this needs to be wider up there. Just gonna slice off this piece. That out of the way, and I am ready to cut the angle that I want there. This is going to be a narrow one, so I will go ahead and cut. It's going to be a very narrow one because I've got, it's maybe too narrow. How much do I have there? It's at least a ½ inch, but it's going to be very, very narrow down there. Let's cut it at a funky angle. Give myself a little bit more anyway. I have some crumb pieces. And then this one will go in there, which will be staggered from that one. I'm liking this combination pretty well. So I will sew that wedge, and then I'm going to trim up the curve as I did before, and then I will probably also do another interim piece and probably another ring up here. You've seen me do that many times now. You won't have to watch it again. I'm back before I said I was going to be back, but I've decided that I want this curve to match up a little better. This is about where it would be, and that doesn't give me much over here on this side. So I've decided as long as I'm going to have to trim that curve a little bit there anyway, and I've got plenty of fabric up here for the ring, that I'm going to recut this curve, and it's only going to cut little slivers off of the black and white print, but that will put me in a better position for moving outward in the circle. This time I really am going to put the wedge in before I cut the curve, which has two advantages. I need to cut that curve only once, and I can better place it. It's before you cut the curve, it's a little harder to tell exactly where that's going to fall. And this way I can do it before I cut the curve and make sure it's where I want it to be. So I'm going to, I want this to be a little wider wedge. I like one this small. It's cutting pretty close. I want this one to be fairly wide, and I don't know, it may be at a sharper angle. I'll give that a try, see what happens. So I'm just going to, and I think I will go ahead and remove the same amount in here. It's not going to, of course, be the same because I have seams in there, so it's not like it's going to go back exactly as it was, but that will give me a wedge to use in the next thing that I have planned. So I'm going to go with that. And I'll be back when that is all added on. I'm always breaking in before I say I'm going to. A couple of things I wanted to point out before I forget. I did end up cutting this curve on this interim piece before I cut this curve. So I'll be cutting this curve to match this. And I did that because this one turned out to be a little wider than I wanted it to be. I just went with it because that's how it went. But for this one, I wanted it to be narrower, and doing it this way is better for me visualizing it as I'm cutting. It's just that whole spatial thing. Again, you may not need to do that at all, but I wanted to do that to make sure that I had. Now the other thing that I'm seeing here, and I'm not sure it bothers me, is that, do I want that? I think I do. All right, so I had inserted that wedge so it would be like this. It's bothering me visually, probably only because I know the stadium checkers game and that's what I have in my head, so that this would need to be angled so that it's going out from that center line. So I'm going to waste a bit of fabric on this one, but I'm going to live with it because I have learned from it. So I will have some extra pieces for my crumb pile here. And I may, no, I don't want to cut any more off that because I don't have much seam allowance there. So if I want that in fact to go out that direction, that one isn't really, and that one isn't really. So do I care about that? That looks better to me than that. So it's still not perfectly going out on the radial line, but I think I might be okay with that. This will give me, yeah, I think that'll be all right. And at least it's giving a bit of a nod to a radial line. So note to self when I'm doing more that I want that to match up better. So here is this piece, and I know I talked about this whole radial thing last week, and somehow it just went out of my head until I was doing the last one here. I also think that I might have put another wedge in here, but this is my learning piece. I do like the combination of the black and white prints with the bright solids. And I did trim this down so it looks a little different than the last time you saw it, but I think that's how I wanted it trimmed. And then this is how the next one would go. And of course that angle is not perfectly set. This would actually be more like out here. So I would fill in with some white as the background there, and then of course this would be filled in. So my plan for a next try, which I'm going to at least get a start on today, is to reverse it so that I use the bright colors for these rings and then the white on black for these slots, and I think narrow black strips in between rather than white. Is that what I want to do? We'll see when I and then that would be the alternating pieces here. So it would be black and white rings, bright rings, black and white rings, bright rings. So do I want to continue the white interim rings? And I think I would do solid white. For one thing, I'm running out of this particular print. Do white or black in between? I think I want the white. I don't want it to be too dark, which I may find with the bright fabrics. That isn't a problem. So I'm going to make a start on that, and I'll do that off camera. I'm just going to use the same process as I have been using. I will note that the reason I'm running into this problem with running out of length here is partly because I'm doing these gentle curves. If you did steeper curves, then it would not be spreading out so much with each of these rings. Just a side note. So maybe I'll try doing a little bit steeper curves and maybe some different curves as I'm doing the second one, but it's going to be basically, it's the same process. I'll just make the curves a little steeper and reverse that, and I'll come back after a couple of rings. I've discovered that because of my spatial relationships challenge, it is easier for me to cut both the curves on one of these rings before I add in a wedge. It just, I don't know, I don't seem to be able to get everything arranged as I want to, placed as I want to, without being able to see those curves. So I'm using some leftover wedges from the previous one we did. So I was cutting out the slots, and so I'll add this one in, and because I want to do that at least reasonably radial look, then it's just easier for me if I can see both sides of the curve before I do that. Makes it easier for me to place everything. And here is this piece in progress. I did a steeper curve here and an uneven curve, so it's fairly gentle here and then makes it steeper, just to add in a little bit of variety. And then I used a very narrow white strip in there, which I like. And I'd like this fine on its own. I do think that it's kind of nice with the first one that we did. So you've got that contrast. This one then would have an arc of white probably to meet up with that. Or they could, of course, I could add more rings on and make them larger circles, quarter circles, whatever. And just to see how it would look if we add in, say, another one. Probably would not be prints like this, but let's see if I can move the camera without making you too dizzy here. Zoom out a bit. That's not going to be much help, is it? Then they would create a circle that isn't really, you know, a circle. Doesn't look like a circle because we don't have equal curves going around there and continuous curves. Anyway, so I'm liking this, and I don't know how I feel about this large of white piece here. At least I didn't know what to think about it, but now I think it's all right, because this one I trimmed down so much. Then this one I think is a decent contrast, pulls it in together, but it's a different curve and a different size, so it all adds to the interest for something for the eye to see and to do. And these I have been doing better on the whole radial thing, which makes my brain happier. Yours may not care at all. So I think that's good good progress. I've certainly learned some things. There isn't anything here that I wouldn't use in a block or a quilt, but there are some things that I've learned to incorporate into future pieces of this. Let me know what you think. If you like these two, positive, negative, together, if you like one better than the other. I'm always happy to see what your opinions are, because of course that's what this channel is all about, is for us to look at things, make some decisions, decide what we like. You don't have to like what I like. I don't have to like what you like to appreciate the art and all of the thought that went into it. And as you start doing more of this, it's less laborious to be thinking about the decisions. I make it sound laborious because I'm trying to speak my thoughts out loud, which I'm sorry that I'm making you privy to my wild and far-flung brain. So let me know what you think, what you might do differently, other ideas for it. And I'm not sure what will happen next week yet, if we'll start something different or if something creeps into my head to add to this process. I rather like that these are not the same, that these aren't going to finish into the edge of the circle being in the same place. Now this is looking like a bandshell to me. Looks like the bandshell in the town where I grew up. Well, vaguely. I mean, the bandshell was symmetrical and all of that, but it looks much more like a bandshell now than stadium checkers, which is okay because stadium checkers was just a starting point. I don't want to duplicate that designer's work. So, all right, that's it for this week. Hope to see you next week. If you haven't subscribed, please take a moment to do that and hit the thumbs up, like button. I forget to do that, and I'm trying to be better about that because it does matter. And as I'm watching other people's videos and I'm liking them and I'm like, that was really good, and I move on to the next one, it's like, no, wait, you should go back and show your appreciation for that video. So if you like this, please remember to like it, add comments, please subscribe. Thank you for being here with me. I look forward to this time I get to spend with you on Wednesdays. So I will see you next week. In the meantime, be well, be safe, be happy, be quilting and designing. Peace.